So, our last question that we have for today that was sent in earlier, and if you haven't yet signed up on our website at Unbound Growth, where you can send in your questions ahead of time, like say something happens during the week and you just want to get that answer later on, make sure that you check out that. Now, our last question is a question that I hear a lot when we're not really entirely sure how to hire. And the question is this: what is the best way for sellers or to hire sellers who will work best with our buyers? Now, we heard the stat before about how the number one thing that buyers want from sellers is the ability to actively listen to them, but it's the last thing that managers are looking for. So let's start there. Let's start with understanding what type of characteristics and mindsets are going to be demanded by our buyers. And unfortunately, though, a lot of the hiring that happens today is very subjective. We have a certain type of person in mind, an athlete or professional performer, someone who's competitive. We take into account the things that we think that they need to be doing in order to be good in the role, but we don't always take into account the things that our buyers need from our sellers in order for them to be successful with them. At the end of the day, the buyers are the ones that make the rule. You remember the golden rule? He who has the gold makes all of the rules. Okay, that's the new golden rule. So when we apply that to hiring, we have to understand how our buyer is going to react to our sellers, but how are they going to react in the market that they're in, on the problem that they're trying to solve that we help them with, and based on what other competition is saying to them. What is the environment that is going to be happening right now? And then based on that environment, what are some of the characteristics that we need our sellers to have to be able to work through those? So for example, is your market highly competitive? Most are. Is your buyer resistant to the idea of making a change? Most are. Is your seller trying to convince someone why they should choose you? Or is your seller trying to convince someone why they should do anything? These are just a few of the questions out of the 34 plus questions that I ask in order to create an ideal seller profile that aligns with who your buyer is. Now, before you can do that, you've got to have an idea of who your ideal buyer is and what their buying process is like and what their communication styles are in order for you to be able to then draft an ideal seller profile that will work with that, align with that, and actually go well with that together. So first step, create your ideal customer profile. Some people call these buyer personas. That's what I call them. Oh, and I have a book for you for that. It is called, and it's on the shelf here somewhere. Come on. Oh, here it is. It's the one with almost all of the sticky notes in it. So I highly recommend this book first to start with. This is called Waiting for Your Cat to Bark by Jeffrey and Brian Eisenberg. It was actually one of the first books that I read on marketing out of college, because what they talk about is how people prefer to buy online. They actually wrote this book back in the early days of Yahoo, when Amazon was first a bookstore. So highly recommend that book to start thinking about the brain science behind how people make decisions to buy. The other thing that I would also check out is B2B Decision Labs, which we mentioned earlier, who has actual neuroscience studies behind how people make their buying decisions today. But this book will help you to create a profile of the style that your buyer has so that you can then line that up to, now that we know who our buyer is, what kind of a seller do we need? So for example, if your sellers are going to be working directly with C-suite executives, they have to be able to tell a business case story. They have to be able to overcome resistance from stubborn CEOs and C-level executives who are facing a lot of risk. There are certain communication styles that they're probably going to need. But there's mindsets and skill sets and aptitudes that you can measure for to determine not only do they know what to do and can they do it, but will those sellers actually do it in the moment that they need to. So starting first with your buyer profile and then lining that up with your ideal seller profile. The other thing that I recommend for those who are hiring is to use an objective sales-specific assessment to determine whether or not those sellers that you're going to be interviewing have the actual aptitudes to be successful in the role. Because the last thing that you want is to try and fit a square peg into a round hole based off of your own subjective biases of how successful you think someone might be. This way, you're using science and data to find the right fits for yourself and for your buyers.